Welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about how to override the tick function and exactly what that means. We're going to have a character version of the tick function, an enemy version as well, and then we're going to learn how we can call the parent version or the base character version of the tick function. So what does it mean to override a function anyway? Let's talk about that. Now let's say we have a function on a parent class. We'll use the tick function as an example. Now, if we want a child class to have its own version of that function, we can use function overrides. Now, in the parent class, we can designate the tick function to be a function you can override in a child class by marking it with the virtual keyword. And when a child class has its own unique version of that same function, it's said that the child class overrides that function. So virtual functions can have overrides in a child class. Now, notice we've marked the function virtual here in the child class. This is technically not required as the function will still be virtual in the child class. But it's a good idea to mark it virtual so that anyone who looks at the child class can see that it's a virtual function. Otherwise, they'd have to go and look for the function in a parent class and see if it exists there and if it's marked virtual. Notice we've also marked it with override at the end. Again, this is not strictly required, but it's also a good idea to mark a function as override if it is indeed an override. And this also will tell the compiler that you think this is an override, and if you mistakenly create a function that is not an override of a function in a parent class, then the compiler will help you out by giving you an error that says something to the tune of, this is not an actual override of any parent function, so maybe you're making a mistake. So we mark an override as virtual and override in the child class. So here's how an override works. Let's say we have an instance of the parent class, and if we call the tick function from that instance, then the code that runs will be that code in the parent version. But if we have an instance of the child class and we call that function, we get the override version, which may have its own unique code. Now, what happens if you have an override in a child class and you want to execute your own unique code in that function, but you also want to execute the code in the parent version? You can do this. You do it by calling the parent version of the function and fully qualifying the function name with the base class name, like we're doing here. Now, if the function requires input parameters, you have to pass those in. You can never call a function that requires input parameters without passing those parameters in. But the cool thing is, you're calling this function from within a function that has input parameters, so you can take the value of that input parameter, in this case delta time, and pass it into the parent version of the tick function, satisfying that requirement. So here's your challenge. You're going to override the tick function. First, you're going to move the tick function into base character. Make this function virtual in the base character class. Now, move the common code into this function, code that both character and enemy share. This involves updating the animation variables and drawing the texture. Then you're going to call the base character version of tick from the derived classes in the tick function. Call this parent version of tick at the very top of the tick function in character and enemy. Pause the video and do this now. Okay, so here we are in base character. We're ready to create the tick function here, and it's going to be virtual. So we're going to say virtual void tick, and this will take a float called delta time. Now let's go ahead and create the function body for this in base character.cpp down here at the bottom. We'll give it a function body and fully qualify the function with the base character class name. And now we have the tick function. Notice that we didn't copy the virtual keyword over to the CPP file. The virtual keyword only goes on the function declaration in the header file, and the compiler will know that that function is virtual. The same goes for the override keyword on function overrides. Now let's go into character.h, And here we see our tick function, but we're going to mark this now as virtual and override. The override goes at the end. Now it's clear that tick is an override of a parent version. We'll do the same thing in enemy.h. So here in enemy, we're going to mark the tick function virtual and override. Now it's clear that tick is an override in enemy. Okay, so now that we have the tick function in base character, we can move some of the code from the character and enemy classes into the base character tick function. Let's go to character.cpp. Now we're setting world pause last frame to world pause. We do this in both character and enemy, so we can move this into base character's tick function. So we'll put that there. Next, in character's tick function, we handle input, and this is unique to the character class, so we're going to leave that there. But next we see that we're updating the animation frame and drawing the character. This is common to both character and enemy, so we'll copy this and paste it here in the base character's tick function. Now we can remove this code from the character's tick function. So we'll delete it here, and we'll delete this first line here. Now we need to call the base character version, so we're going to say base character tick, and we need to satisfy that float input parameter requirement, and we'll do that by passing in delta time. Now let's go to enemy.cpp. And we see that all the code in the tick function here has been moved into the base character version. So we can delete all of this, and all we need here in the tick function is a call to the base character version of tick. So we'll say base character tick and pass in delta time. Now all we're doing is calling base character's tick function. If we would have never overrode the function, we'd get the same functionality. But later we're going to add some extra stuff to the enemy tick function, such as AI for chasing the character and so on. So we're overriding it here in anticipation that we're going to add extra functionality later. Now we can go to Run and start debugging. And we see that everything works just fine. So in summary, we've learned what it means to override functions. We created function overrides for the tick function and called the base class version in the character and enemy classes. Great job! See you in the next video.